G'day everyone, and welcome to our CSER Remote Learning webinar number 5, which is teacher collaboration in Microsoft Teams. It's probably a little bit mislabeled calling this remote learning because it's more about remote teaching and working together as teachers. I really want to stress that this webinar would be really good for middle leaders and school leaders, principals, assistant principals, those kinds of people as well. So this has still got value for teachers, don't get me wrong, so don't hang up. But if you are able to share this webinar with school leaders, I think it's going to be a little bit more useful to them than maybe some of our other webinars were. All right, so my name is Troy. I am a learning delivery specialist from Microsoft Australia Education, which is just a fancy way of saying I'm a former teacher. I'm a former primary teacher. I was 16 years in schools, and I'm coming up on my 22nd year in education. This is our website for remote learning, aka.ms/Microsoft Remote Learning, aka.ms/Microsoft Remote Learning. That's a really good place for you to go to find out all about what Microsoft Australia has to say on this subject. It's a really good landing page for you, but also a launching page for you to go out and see some of the great stuff that we've got. I'd like to invite Deb Kroger to hop off mute. She's in the call today, and I'd like her to tell you all about some of the great resources that they've built for you on the CSER platform.
Hi everybody, I'm Deb Kroger from the Learning and Technologies team at Catholic Ed SA. When you are watching this webinar, if you've got any questions afterwards that you want to ask from a Catholic Ed point of view, please do use my email address and send them through. I'm happy to answer them. And also the link up there, hopefully you'd be aware by now that CSER created an online learning website, and that link to that page in particular has got resources there for using digital tools like Teams, Immersive Reader, etc. when you're working online with students. So hopefully you find that a valuable resource.
Awesome, and I bet they will. I've also got Anna Suzuki on the line, and I'll get her to introduce herself and tell you all about what she does in her normal job, but also what she's done now in light of COVID-19.
Hi everybody. So it's Anna from Sydney. So I usually work at the Microsoft store in Sydney, and my position is product advisor, which is a fancy way of saying that I deal with customers. And in the light of COVID-19, our store started doing virtual trainings. Therefore, I'm here.
Yeah, excellent. So she's going to be handling the Q&A today. So as you've got questions, Anna will be answering them online, and also from time to time we'll stop and she'll feed me some of those questions as well. So here's our webinar agenda. We're going to look at the Microsoft Educator community again. I'll take you through that. Then I'm going to talk about creating a school team. We're going to look at creating channels, posts, files, tabs and apps, and seeing how that all sort of integrates. We're going to talk about how you can manage your team, some of the back-end settings. We'll talk about notifications. Also, we'll play around a little bit with Teams meetings. Then we'll do some next steps and even have a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. As I said to you before, this is a different sort of webinar because it's more about a whole school approach, or at least groups within your school approach. It's not about one teacher setting up a school team. Obviously that wouldn't make any sense, right? So it's about sort of a school-wide initiative, and if you haven't already set up your school-wide team, then hopefully this will prompt you to do so, because I think you're going to see it's really going to be useful, especially in the remote learning context. We're all working from home. I was thinking about, for example, a lot of schools were going to have a shared drive, which probably doesn't have remote access, which means that a lot of your files and documents and everything are all stuck at school, and unless you go in there, it's really hard for you to access those files. So we're going to look at some of the solutions around that. It's going to take a little bit of work to get it set up, but once it's set up, it's going to make your life a lot more enjoyable, or at least a lot easier. All right, so that's where we're headed today. Now, the other thing to remember is this workshop, whilst it is different, is still built on a lot of what we have explored already in previous webinars. So please go back and have a look at those previous webinars, and we'll share the links of where you can actually access those. We'll share those at the end. So if there's a couple of times today where you're feeling a bit kind of lost and what's he talking about, it might be really good to go back and at least watch our first webinar, which is about using Teams with students, because a lot of the basics of Teams are actually addressed in there. We'll cover some of those today, but certainly not all of them. All right, so this is our Microsoft Educator Center. It used to be called the Educator Community. Sometimes I still call it that, but it's education.microsoft.com. Remembering that courses in there are recognized by the South Australian TRB, which means that you can do those courses and they will count as your required PD time that you're supposed to do every year. So we have courses in there, individual courses, which will teach you how to use Microsoft technology in your classroom in effective and engaging ways, while also earning those professional development hours. And there's some really good stuff in there on remote learning, but we also have learning paths. So learning paths are going to focus on skill development or the mastering of a Microsoft product in a learning path, and it's a collection of courses for deeper learning in a topic. So what's happened is some very bright people have actually looked at these courses and gone, okay, let's suggest these in a sequential order that, you know, one builds on the next one, etc. And then you get a certification around that path. And then, of course, as I said, because it's recognized by the TRB, you need to have some way to view your achievements and record those achievements. So what you do is you sign into this using your regular school email address and password, and then there's badges and points that you've earned in your profile, so it's, you know, it's sort of gamified. But more importantly, there's a training transcript which is created, and you can print that off or create it as a download it as a PDF, and you can send that to people if you need to show proof of your learning. So keep an eye out for that when you go in and sign up. All right, so the other thing to remember is office.com. So this is our Office 365 start page. Remember, this is not so much about Office installed on your machine, but Office through the browser. So there's tools there that you used to, like Word and PowerPoint, Excel, etc., but also things like Teams and Sway and maybe Forms and other things that you haven't used before. You just sign into this in the same way you sign into the Educator Community, which is your normal school email address and password. All right, so your school email address and password will get you in, and then you're able to access all the goodness that is Office 365. I want to remind you as well that you can install the full version of Office 365 Pro Plus down on your machine. You have 5 free copies there, so please feel free to jump into that and do so. All right, so let's talk about Teams. So Teams is a digital hub tailored for both collaborative work and learning. It brings your conversations, your meetings, your content, your apps, and your assignments all together in one place. So the cool thing about Teams is Teams has video calling embedded into that. Okay, it used to be called Skype for Business. Instead, we rolled that now into Teams. So you can do voice calls, video calls, you can chat, and you've also got the teams themselves where you can do all sorts of collaboration. You can bring in your existing 365 apps, right? So things that you know and love, like Word and PowerPoint, Excel, and other things that you probably didn't even know were there, things like SharePoint and Stream and Forms, etc. And some of these and OneNote we've addressed in earlier webinars, so you can go back and look at those and the integration of those into your remote learning. The other thing is we bring in third-party apps, so it's not just about Microsoft apps. So you can see there we've got things like Wakelet and Wikipedia and Kahoot and YouTube, and those apps can actually be brought into your Teams experience. And we'll have a little bit of a look at that as well. And then, of course, there's the assignments features, which is a really cool way to deliver remote learning and assessment and things like that. So really key to note that Teams is not just another app, but it's a hub that brings everything else inside. Okay, so let's talk about Teams and how to access Teams and what it looks like, etc. So the first thing is we have a series of apps. And I'm just going to, I don't know if you guys can actually see that on your screen. Hopefully you can't, but I'm just going to get rid of that because it's annoying mine. So you can get it on desktop. So whether you've got a Windows machine, a Linux machine, or you're using a Mac, you can download the desktop app. That is where you're going to get the quickest and the best experience, because obviously these machines are more complex, and so we can have more complexity across those apps. But you can also use it on your Android phone, your iPhone, your iOS tablet, that is your Apple iPad, and also your Android tablet as well. There are dedicated apps for those. They're not going to have all the features and the bells and whistles that we saw in the desktop, but I don't want to downplay the fact that having these as mobile apps are really very cool. Being able to, in the same way that you check your notifications on social media through your phone, you can do that in Teams as well. And then we've got the browser apps. So if you don't have, you don't want to have the dedicated app, you can access that through Edge, Chrome, Safari, and I know it also works on Firefox. And you can download it there at aka.ms/get-teams. Okay, so this is Teams for Education. I'm actually going to make these, well, I already have made these slides available to you. Again, I'll share that link at the end. Some of the slides that I'm going to be talking to today or even presenting are more for you after the fact than so much talking about today. All right, so this is for you. When you go back and access those slides, you can, have a look at some of the different features and bits and pieces. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take you into Teams, and I'm going to show you how to access Teams and also some of the cool things that we can do in Teams. So here we are on our Office 365 start page. We can open up Teams through the online app here, or you could, if you have Teams installed on your machine, if you pull your mouse down, you can actually search for it by clicking on the start button, and you can search for your for Teams in there if it's already installed. Okay, so I'm going to go through the web app today, which is a little bit slower, but because I'm already using Teams to broadcast this live event, it's a little bit hard for me to show you the app. In fact, it's more than a little bit hard, it's impossible. So when I come into Teams, you can see here I've got a series of teams that I have actually been a member of, or that I have created. All right, now what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to take us into a random team. I'm just going to come into a class team like this one here. And I just want to show you quickly some of these features. Now, remembering that we really did this in depth in the first webinar, so you can go back and access that, and that's that one that we had on remote learning using Teams. But I just want to show you really quickly what we call the anatomy of the team and how things work. So you've got an activity feed up here, and that's like your notifications in some of your other social media platforms, and that will basically, click on that, any notifications, you can see I don't use this demo tenant much, but my notifications will come down here, and it's like a feed in Facebook or your feed in Twitter or something like that, and you can click on those and it'll take you to those posts. Now you'll get little notification buttons, a little red dot will come up here and let you know if there's new notifications. You've got the ability to have private chats, okay, so chats away from everybody else. I can see all my teams by clicking on the Teams button. The assignment features lives there. I've got a calendar, so I can actually schedule events, and then I can make calls, and I can also access my personal OneNote and my my personal OneDrive, etc. All right, so that's the tabs down here on our left-hand side. Now, when we come inside a team, we can see that we've got channels, and channels live down here, and we can rename those and change those and create those, and we can set them up according to different domains or topics, whatever's relevant to that team. We have, and I'll talk about that more in depth a little bit later. We have the ability to have posts. This is our conversation. We have files in here. Files are the shared files, different from files over here, which are mine. These are the shared files for the team. And then we have other tabs across the top. So we're in a class team here, so we can bring in class notebooks, assignments and grades, etc. Okay, now when we create a team, I want to talk to you about the two types of teams that are perfect for school faculties and staff, right? And they are the staff team and the other team, right? And your tenant may actually call that an anyone team, but it's a staff or other or staff or anyone. Now, it's important to note that a staff member's team, that is this one over here should only be created if you'd like to create a staff notebook with private sections. Okay, otherwise it's recommended that you create the other team, and I really do stress that, because most often staff collaboration is better done in the anyone team, and it provides a more flexible notebook for school staff. So collaboration is the one excellent way that Microsoft Teams can save your faculty and your school team's time and effort. Everything that's needed for all the academic departments in your school to work together is all in one environment. So again, I want to stress, when we create a team, we want to create another team. This creates a staff notebook, and if you don't know what that is or you're not interested in finding out, then please just jump into other. But you can search online what is a staff notebook and it'll tell you all about it, and that's basically the difference there. Okay, Microsoft Teams can support up to 5,000 members in each team. All right, so I'm sure for most of you that's going to cover most of your staff, or everyone at least. Everything is possible with Teams. All right, so you can communicate effectively through conversations, chats, online meetings, calls, and web conferencing. You can work collaboratively in OneNote, right? Even if you do set up the other team, you still can use OneNote. It just won't be a staff notebook. All right, but you've got those apps like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other files, etc. And you can customize your workspace with Microsoft and third-party apps, which we talked about before. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you through a bit of a walk through a primary school team. Now, I was a primary school teacher for a very long time, and I know that when I stepped into this role, the idea of technology tended to be adopted quicker and dare I say it, I'm sorry primary school teachers, but usually a little bit better by the secondary schools. So what I'm going to do today though is I'm going to turn that on its ear, and I'm going to really speak to everybody, but predominantly to primary schools, because I want to show primary schools how easy this is and how useful it's going to be. All right, so I'm going to share with you a structure of a primary school, but high schools, I'm going to share with you a little bit about what I think you could do and how you could adopt and adapt this. Please remember, it's still relevant to everybody, even though I'm speaking predominantly to primary schools. So we want to set up an all-staff team, okay? So we want to provide a central place for all staff to communicate and collaborate. We want to provide a location for secure file storage and sharing, and we want channels to focus on different domains of interest. Now, that secure file storage and sharing, as I said before, is a key issue for schools at the moment, especially working remotely and not being able to access our shared drives on premise at the school. Second thing we've set up is a leadership team. Okay, so this is true for primary and secondary. Okay, but we want to provide a central place for all leadership to communicate and collaborate. We want to provide a location for sensitive file storage. Okay, so this is the ones that we don't need all the staff to be able to access. All right, security is the same in both teams, but we just keep the sensitive files away from everybody else. And we also have private channels to ensure confidentiality for specific topics. And then we have our class teams. Okay, so we provide a central place for personalised teaching and learning, provide a location for curriculum resources, learning engagements and assessments, and we support the distance online delivery of curriculum and capture of learning assets. Now, this is a primary school. This is our advice to a primary school. You have a staff team, a leadership team, and multiple class teams. However, for a secondary school, you are probably going to have, on top of this, dedicated faculty teams, right? So you'll see in a moment when I take you in and show you that the all-staff team for a primary school can actually have most of the faculty and teaching teams, just because of the way primary schools are set up and the way that we work together. But in a secondary environment, you're going to have one more box here, which will be faculty teams. So maths will have its own team, humanities will have its own team, science will have its own team, and you may even want to break that down further and have, for example, say science has its own team, whereas 7 to 10 science may have its own team. That's entirely up to you. All right, but I do want to stress for secondary teams, secondary schools, there will be one more box here. Now, the other thing to note, and this is going to get a little bit technical, but Office 365 aggregation is right across. So our groups, our SharePoint, our OneNote, our OneDrive, Stream and Planner, it's cloud-based, which means it's accessible anywhere on any device. Remembering we don't have to worry about Q Drive, P Drive, L Drive. It's all in the cloud and we can access it from anywhere. And then it does meet all those security and compliance requirements. So let's talk first about channels. All right, so I'm going to take you into my team here. Excuse me a moment, I've got to find where I am. So I'm going to take you into this staff team. Now this is an imaginary primary school. It's called Murray Street Primary. Okay, and for you guys we should have called it St. Murray Street Primary, but anyway, you can see here I've got a whole heap of channels. Now I mentioned those channels to you before, all right, but channels are places for large bodies of work or specific needs or topics. So every team has what's called a general channel. The general channel cannot be renamed or deleted. All right. So it's there by default. Now every channel comes with its own posts or conversations tab. It has the files tab and also the ability to add further apps. Right. You can see here I've added an LMS and also a duty schedule, but we'll talk more about that a little bit later. All right, now you can easily add channels to your team as needed. You just click on the ellipses next to the team name over here and you just click add channel. All right, so you can add as many channels as you want. Now our advice to you is minimize the number of teams but maximize the number of channels. All right, so people don't have to be jumping in and out of teams. They can come into a team and everything that they need is in one location. Now you need to name your new channel. Okay, and your and each one of those channels, if you look, for example, if we go into say the library, you can see they also have posts, files, and the ability to add other tabs across the top. So every one of these will have posts and files. All right. Now, perhaps your department is developing a new track or course of study for your particular school. So a channel is a great way to keep track of this. So you can see here we've got professional learning teams, which once upon a time were called just committees. All right. So in this primary school, there's a place for the English PLT to come together and work. So inside here they have their posts and their discussions, etc. All right. So this is their chat that they're having around that specific topic, which is the PLT for English. And then you can also see they keep their files in here as well. All right. So in primary schools where I worked, we would have, for example, down here, like you've got your year 1 team that are working together, and you can see, actually, let's go into year 6 because there's a little bit more happening up here. And you can see that the year 6 team have been chatting with one another and talking about whatever it is that they're talking about. You can see the links across the top are relevant specifically to them. But remembering in primary schools, when it comes to like maths or English, you're probably going to have representatives from each year level come together into the PLT. So here we have the maths PLT, for example, and then that's where they would actually store their files and have their discussions and all that kind of thing as well. All right. So now everyone who needs to be able to see that information in that PLT can access it, weigh in on important decisions and contribute to the conversation. All right. So the other thing too is if you look, there's a lot, I'm looking at this from someone that's created the team and there's a lot of channels. All right. But if I was a grade 6 teacher, for example, who was maybe in the maths PLT, a lot of these channels may not be relevant to them. So what they can do is, for example, they might say, look, the specialist channel, specialist teachers, art, music, PE, etc. That's not relevant to me. So what I can do is I can click on my little ellipses and I can hide that channel. And what happens is that channel, give it a moment, it's going to vanish. There it is, and it now lives in here in hidden channel. So I can still access that channel by jumping down there, but I'm not overwhelmed by all this number of channels. So all the channels that are irrelevant to me, I would hide. Okay, so that way I'm not bombarded visually, but I'm also not bombarded by notifications, because when I hide a channel, the notifications for that channel are basically stop. So I can show and hide channels really easily. So if it's hidden, I click on show. If it's showing, then I just, as I said before, I just click on hide. All right, so that's how we do that. So it's really important to note that whilst, yes, this team has this many channels, Teachers don't need to be overwhelmed by that number of channels. They just hide the irrelevant channels and show the relevant channels. All right, so that's really important to note. Now, the other thing I want to share with you is just about the channel structure that I've done here. Now, remembering this is going to be different in a secondary context. This is a primary context. So what we've done is we've actually, for the whole staff team, we've actually looked at all the different domains, right? So this is their, you know, their union channel. This is their education support staff, you know, you may call them LSOs, learning support officers. This is facilities and grounds, library, parent communications, etc. All these different domains, and we've also got dedicated year level channels, which we saw a moment ago. So all these channels are domains that are important to the school that need a chat, but also need a storage area for their files. And again, I'm going to share this this slide deck with you, so you can have a look at that and use it as a resource. Now, what I've shared with you as well is we've got channels and then their purposes. And this is when you're thinking about setting up your staff team, you may want to think about, okay, what channels do we need and what purpose do they serve? And if they don't serve a purpose, don't create them, right? Don't just say, oh yeah, we need, you know, tuck shop and everything. If they're not going to use it, don't include it. But if they are going to use it, then definitely include it. The cool thing about thinking about teams like this is you have an opportunity to not only think about how the school actually works together, because if we make a team that's irrelevant, people won't use it, but we also have an ability to push a little bit of our educational philosophy. And I want to show you what I mean by that. You can see that what I've done here is in my staff team, I've created channels for every single area that is relevant to the entire school. Okay, rather than dedicated teams for each individual faculty. Now, secondary, different story, all right? But the reason I've done that is because philosophically, I believe that we should be collaborating more. So I want the year 2 teachers to be able to see what year 1 are doing. I want the year 5 teachers to be able to see what year 6 are doing, because they should be working more together than perhaps they are now, or maybe you're in a school where it's definitely, you know, right across year levels, which is awesome. But you can see here that if we want to go in and have a look, like I'm a year 4 teacher, I'm not part of the PLT for English, but I do want to go in and see what they're doing, or I do want to ask questions, then that openness of collaboration and that openness of communication is there. Now, remembering that what happens in these channels is that the conversation is transparent, it's not secret. All right, so that means that teachers can talk to one another, and other teachers who maybe didn't know that they had that question or didn't know that that file was important can see that without having their attention drawn to it. If you want to have private chats, you can set up private chats one-to-one or even groups. Okay, so keep that in mind as well. Okay, so that's the purpose, as I said, the purpose and the channels there for your whole school team. Now, what it's going to look like, remember, for for secondary, is that you're not going to have these year level teams, and probably not going to have these PLT, you know, English, maths at 6. These would be dedicated teams. Okay, so a secondary whole staff team is probably going to have less channels, because they're not going to need, you know, English, maths, STEM, and, you know, even your wellbeing program may need a dedicated team. But for primary, fewer teams, more channels. Secondary, different story. All right, so go on and have a look at that. Now, the other thing I want to share with you is our leadership team. So there's our channels and our purposes there. So we need to really focus on what it is that we're setting up and why we're setting it up. But I want to take you in and show you what that leadership team looks like. Okay, so you can see there, we've got not a whole lot of channels, but a lot of these channels are private. That is, they're locked. Now, the reason why is because of the sensitive nature of this information. Not the majority of the school is not even a member of this team. They can't access it at all. But we might have principal's assistants and receptionists and these other people in the school who need to be able to access some of these channels, but we don't necessarily want them to be accessing everything. So we can create private channels and just invite individual members, right? So we can include and exclude people. All right, so that's the leadership channel. So sometimes we may want to make not just the leaders, but those that assist the leaders to be able to have access. But please know you can lock things down in there. So you can see there that we've got things like the general channel, which, you know, we obviously can't remove or delete, but that's communication and general file storage. But then we've got facilities, finance, HR, etc. So what does it look like when you come in? Remember I said you're going to be hiding and showing channels. So it's not going to look the same for everyone. So we have our principal here. All right. And when she goes into her teams, because of the way that she's set up the hiding and the showing of channels, she can only see these. She's chosen to only see these channels here. All right. So what she got there, she's got about 10 channels there. So she's not overwhelmed by the 16 channels, but these are the ones that are relevant to her. So she'll get notifications around those channels when things are happening in those channels. But remember, she can still go back and pop her head in and see what's going on in these other channels, as principals are wont to do. In the leadership team, she sees everything, all right, because she's the final say. But not everybody who's in that leadership team is going to want to see all those channels, especially channels that are locked to them. So they're going to hide those. And then classes, she doesn't see any of the classes, right, because she's Victoria Principal. However, if we were a class teacher, like a grade 6 teacher, then we're going to see probably just the one class. But if we were, say, a year 9 science teacher, we may see multiple classes because we're dealing with multiple cohorts, different in the primary to secondary. So what does that look like for her? Well, it looks like this. Okay, so when she comes into the team, she just sees those channels there, and the ones that are hidden to her, remember, she can still go in and access them if she wants. Okay. So that's the view. Now let's talk about the posts, okay, making posts. So I'm going to come back to my whole staff team. I'm going to go into the general channel, and you can see there's a lot of conversation that's been happening in here. So the post tab in Teams appears in the general channel, as well as any of the other channels that we've created, and all members can view and add to conversations in those channels as long as they have access to them. We can @mention people, and you probably know that from your own experience of Twitter and Facebook and things like that. We can, using the @ symbol, we can draw people's attention. I'll show you that in a moment. But if any member wants to begin a conversation in the channel designated for their grade level or whatever other domain they're involved in, rather than sending emails to multiple people, receiving multiple responses and worrying about whether all the necessary parties were included, the member simply begins a conversation in the channel where the work is occurring, and now everyone is able to see it and weigh in on the important decisions, and has visibility and the ability to contribute. So let me show you what I mean. If I come into the general channel, you can see, excuse me, I'm just going to bump that off. You can see here that I have the ability to start a conversation. All right, so I can just go in there as myself, and I could start saying, hi, everyone. I click send, and that will appear. Click send over here, excuse me. And that will appear in the chat. All right. But I also have the ability, as I said, to @mention people. So if I type in the @, so I might be wanting to send a message to the art teacher. His name is Art Garfunkel. I can just start @mentioning his name, and then he will get a notification specifically, even if he's not following that channel. All right. So if I was to send in a message, he would get an activity notification up here. I can also @mention the entire channel. So I just go @ and start typing the word channel. So whatever channel I'm in, everyone following that channel will get a notification. Or I can @mention the entire team. All right. So in this context, it would be everyone that's a member of staff of Murray Street. They will all get a notification. So that's like, you know, when we used to bomb everybody with that mass DL email that we'd send out and everybody would get it. It's the same kind of thing. So use that with a little bit of sensitivity. Now you can see here when I click on the format button, I can do things like you know, bold, italics, and you know, make my notification and comment you know, very sort of wordy if I wanted to. I mean, Word as an app. I can also add a subject which can draw people's attention to it. I can create what's called an announcement, right? So an announcement goes right across this channel. I don't need to @mention everybody. Everybody will get a notification, and I can change the colors. I can add a graphic. So we've got some really good ones for education here. So I'm going to throw this one in here. All right, and then I can type in my headline. So I might have something about a notification about virtual coffee, and then I could throw in a subheading, and then I can also put in a notification. All right, I can also post that in multiple channels. So I could certainly post it in the general channel, but I could put it in multiple channels, not just in this team, but in other teams as well. All right, so that's how we make an announcement. Now, the other thing we can do, I'm going to discard that. The other thing we can do is we can add files. Okay, so we can, from our OneDrive, from our computer, or other parts of Teams, we can also throw in our emojis, which are fun. We can throw in our GIFs for a bit of animated fun, and let's face it, nothing's better than a GIF sometimes. We can throw in stickers as well, all right? So we can personalize those. We can have meetings, which we'll talk about later, and other options as well. All right, so that's what we do in terms of posts. Now, in terms of files, right, which is your file storage, remembering that every single channel has its own dedicated file storage. So when we look at a team like this, we know that if we come into the Year 6 channel, then we know when we come into files, these are going to be our Year 6 files, right? So what once upon a time would have been, you know, a root directory in your Q drive or P drive or whatever you call your shared drive. Now what we know is we can come over here to Year 6 and we can certainly look at the chat, but the chat is wrapping itself around our ability to store all our files, just like we used to do on Q drive, right? But the difference is this is now in the cloud, and everybody can collaborate. So when I create a document in here, it is automatically shared with everybody in the team. So that means other people can collaborate and get involved in that. So no longer, you know, opening up a document which says read-only access user 2753 is currently viewing this file. No, we open up the file and we can be on there at the same time, all right? So that's the collaboration. But I can create Word documents, Excel documents, PowerPoint, everything from inside, which is pretty cool. The other thing that I can do as well is I can, by clicking here on Add a Tab, I can bring in my third-party apps as well, right? So I've got, first of all, on my Microsoft apps that I can bring in, and I can also bring in my third-party apps, but I'll come back to that in a minute. I can upload directly from my files, whether that's on my computer or in OneDrive. I can add cloud storage. This is really interesting to note, and this is going to depend on your school, but you can bring in existing SharePoint sites. You can even bring in personal Dropbox and Google Drive spaces as well if your school has a hybrid of two platforms. All right. The other thing we can do, as I said before, is we can collaborate on a document. So if I was to create a new Word document, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a new Word document here. You can see it's that easy. So I'm going to call this Caesar Today. I create that document, and then bang, it opens up in Word Online inside Teams, right? So I don't have to be jumping out into the full version or jumping out into the browser version. It all happens inside Teams. And anybody can collaborate on this. Now, remembering that if this isn't doing everything that I want it to do because it's not the full version, I can click here and open in the desktop app, and it will open up on my desktop app, even though the actual file is living in Teams, all right? And it's really easy to manage things in here as well. I can just click on my ellipses and I can delete that file and do a whole heap of other things that I want to as well. All right, so we talked before about bringing those third-party apps in. All right, so remembering it's really easy to do. And what I've done here, if you look at the tabs across the top here, you have the ability to bring in things like, you know, YouTube clips and stream clips and Microsoft Forms, but you can bring anything that's a website. So what we've done for grade 6 here is they've got their LMS, right? So they're using Compass as an LMS, and so their LMS page is sitting right across the top there as well. They've got, this is a Victorian school, so they've got the Victorian curriculum web page for Year 6 is sitting there as well. And then they've also got, you can see here, they've got another planning document which is available to everybody. Those all still live, those files that they're accessing can still live in the file section, but you can create these tabs across the top, which is kind of nice. All right, so let's talk about managing our team. So to manage our team, what we do is we click on the ellipses over here, all right, next to the team name, and we come into manage team. Now, this is only true of owners of the team. It's not true of members. So depending on how your school is going to set up its school team, but I'm going to take you in and show you. I click on here and I'm going to go to, I click on here and I'm going to go to manage team. And you can see the kind of controls that you can have. So this is where I can add and remove members. I can change people from members to owners and owners to members, which means they have more control. Pending requests is if people are invited to join the team and you haven't opened it, so you need to approve them. I have my channels features here. So this is where I can add channels. I can rename channels in this section here. I can also decide whether I want everybody to see them or whether they have to manually show and hide. The settings is really important. So this is where I can change the team picture. For example, member permissions. What do I want my members to be able to do? Do I want them to be able to create and update channels? Now that may be true, but sometimes, you know, especially in something like a staff team, I would probably turn that off and just have, you know, people that are able to do that, right? Dedicated owners. Do I want them to be able to create private channels, restore channels, add and remove apps, upload custom apps, etc. There's a whole heap of features that I can access here. So go and have a look at those. You've also got the ability to invite guests, people that are outside of your tenant, outside of your school environment. You can bring them in depending on whether you switch that on or off. Some schools switch that off, other schools leave that on. The other thing that we can do, as I talked about, you can switch on and off the ability to @mention. You can create a team code. All right, which means that you can share that team code, and when people come into teams, they can enter that code and join your team. So you don't have to add them manually, and you can remove that code too if that code starts to get handed around, for example. You've got the ability to control the Giphies and the memes and the stickers and all those kinds of things as well. We have some basic analytics, which looks at the usage inside teams and the way that people are using it. So get in there and have a look at that. Now, the other thing I want to draw your attention to is notifications. It's really important that you set the notifications properly as an individual user, or teams can become very noisy. All right, so you can set things like, you know, emails and notifications, etc. I want to show you how to do that. But we need to make sure that we minimize the unnecessary noise and distraction, or people will get annoyed with Teams and they'll switch it off. All right, so again, this is key. You need to make sure that you show your staff how to set their notifications. All right, so remember, if a channel is hidden, then notifications are switched off. If a channel is shown, then the notifications are switched on. All right, so let me show you how to access that. So what you do is you come into your team settings, right, and this is my account up here. All right, and I'm going to go into settings. This is my personal settings, so I can set the theme, whether I want it in dark mode, default, or high contrast if I have visibility issues. I can set whether my teams are a grid or whether my teams are in a list form. I can set my language. I want to stress it's really important to make sure that your language is is set to English Australia. Okay, keyboard language keep as US, all right, because we use the US keyboard in Australia. But over here are my notifications. Probably the most important thing down here is, see how it says missed activity emails? Make sure that your missed activity emails are at least once every 8 hours or daily. If you set it down here to as soon as possible, once every 10 minutes, once every hour, people would be bombarded with missed activity emails, right? And trust me, you don't want that. So I want to really stress, make sure that your missed activity emails, my suggestion, put it to daily. All right, and after you use it for a while, you're not even going to want those. Okay, when you get notifications, there's a couple of different levels of notification. You can get a banner, which is a little banner that just sort of switches across the screen here and then vanishes, or you can just get it in your notification up here, or you can get an email. Again, my suggestion is don't get an email, even if you're new to Teams. So just set it to banner or even only show in newsfeed. As a matter of fact, after a little while, I actually find that I just want everything in the feed or the lowest possible setting. All right, but that's my advice to you, but it'll be different for different people. The key is it's up to the individual to set these, but I do want to stress, make sure that you deal with these missed activity emails. All right, so go in and have a look at that. Now, That's for the blanket settings right across Teams. But if I have a channel that's very important to me for some reason, I may want to, see I'm clicking on the ellipses over here, I want to set channel notifications specifically for that channel. So it's not going to be every channel, just that channel. All right, so you can go in and check that out. But again, remember, this is very personal, but don't forget to steer your staff back to it. Now, the other thing I want to share with you, and just looking at time, can't believe this has flown by already, but is Teams meetings. So Teams meetings, same as we did in our first webinar. So please go back and access that first webinar and you'll learn all about Teams meetings. It's the same for staff, okay? The settings and everything, the usage, exactly the same. But you can have 250 staff in a Teams meeting at once, all right? The most recent speaker moves into view. At the moment, for most of us, we can see 4 people at once. What's being rolled out at the moment is it's now going to be 9, so you'll see 3 by 3. And then everybody else is in a small little button down the bottom, okay? What you do is, if there's someone that's important, you right-click that person and you get the ability to pin them. All right, which means that they won't vanish, okay? You also have the ability to share content and all that kind of stuff. Again, go back and look at our first webinar about all the cool things you can do with Teams meetings. So you can have your virtual staff meetings. You can view them on your phone, iPad, anything that's got Teams running on it. The other thing too is that we make these recordings. Again, we really harp on this in that first webinar, but when you have a meeting, that's a video meeting, it gets recorded and it gets, well, you choose to record it and it gets saved into Stream. It automatically gets uploaded to the channel, so people that missed it can go back and access it, or people that want to use it as a reference can go back and access it. It creates automated closed captions. Cool thing about Teams channels is you can turn on real-time English captions, but the recording will automatically create those, okay? And it also creates a searchable transcript. It's thrown into Stream. Okay, you can access it in Teams, but also you can access it in Stream, and you can see there 500,000 total videos can be stored in Stream, and this is just for the school, right? So there's a lot of space there, and videos can be 50 gigabytes. All right, so I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to see if there were any burning questions coming from the Q&A. Anna?
No, we seem to be okay.
Okay, so no questions?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, cool. So taking you through the next steps then. Remember, education.microsoft.com is your educator center. There's some great courses around using Teams, but other things as well. This one here, support.office.com/Teams. This is a really good page for you to visit because it will take you and show you a lot of the basics around getting started with Teams, your Teams channels, tracking activity, chat, the meeting calls, etc. Now I can hear my little dog is about to start whining, which is what he does. So I'm going to throw myself on mute and just let him out. Excuse me.
Just while Troy's doing that, it's Deb here, just to let you know that CSER did actually publish some suggestions around how to set up your teams for your staff for primary and secondary schools, and I've just uploaded those to the folder where this webinar will be stored if you haven't seen those, so that's where that will be.
Great, thanks for that, Deb. Sorry about, this is the real work from home and my dog is just going nuts. Called my kids down, but they're all learning from home, so we'll see how we go in terms of silencing him. Anyway, last thing is the CSER resources is available for you there. I shouldn't say last thing. Next thing is CSER resources are there and you can contact Deb as she just mentioned. But if you want to get our slides and recordings for today, please go to aka.ms/CSER webinars. So that's the slides and recordings for today and also our other webinars as well, our earlier webinars. And then great links for you, aka.ms Microsoft Remote Learning. Also, if you're on Twitter, please follow Microsoft Education Australia. And there's also some great support documents for educators at support.microsoft.com/education. Please feel free to join our newsletter, our email newsletter, and also follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. This is purely professional pages, so you can follow me. You don't need to add me as a friend. and then you can see all the updates and everything that we're pushing out. So unless we've got some questions there, Anna, I think we're kind of done.
Yeah, just one question. This is regarding the recording that will be available on stream. The question is, how do you automatically record and upload to stream?
Yep, sure. So what you need to do is go back and watch our first webinar. All right, but it's really very easy. When you start a meeting, a Teams meeting, you have the option to record, and once you record, then the upload into stream, etc., is all done automatically. So all you need to do is start the recording of your Teams meeting, and then stream takes care of everything else. But again, go back and watch our first video, or visit some of those links, and there's certainly information there for you.
Perfect. Thank you, Troy. And that's it.
No worries. Okay, guys. Well, we're going to end there. And if you have any questions, please remember to reach out to Deb, or you can reach out to myself through social media. And we've got another webinar this afternoon all about inclusivity and equity, and using some of these tools to reach our most vulnerable learners in the midst of remote learning. So I hope to see you this afternoon. Thanks, everyone.